Morning, everybody. Our God is so good, isn't he? We're always so excited to be here. It is just such a wonderful thing to be with this group of people and to worship God together. It's just a wonderful thing. We're always excited to do it. And I hope that you have your Bible with you this morning. We're going to be spending a lot of time reading the text as per usual, and I'm really looking forward to it. But first, I want you to imagine that you work for a company. And you've worked for this company for a long time, and they've been great to you the entire time that you've worked with them. And your boss comes in one day and gets a group of coworkers, employees, including you, takes you into a conference room, and they say, "We want to significantly improve your lifestyle." We're talking raises, we're talking bonuses, we're talking benefits, I don't know, company car, whatever sounds good to you. They want to offer you all of those things. But then they say, there are going to be some things that you have to do. There's going to be a couple of things that are going to be required of you before this lifestyle increase can happen. But then your boss explains to you that every step along the way, with each one of those tasks and each one of those requirements, they're going to be helping you out with every single step. And even more so, they're going to use their power and their influence to make sure that it works out well for you. And if that's not enough, your boss has a contract already written out for you. And it says all of these things are going to be true, and it's going to be legally binding. And if you're anything like me, and I know I am, if you're anything like me, you're going to be weighing the pros and the cons here. And it sounds pretty good. I mean, your boss is basically giving you this lifestyle increase because they're helping you out all the way, through this journey. And as you're thinking this and going through the pros and cons in your head, the group of people that you're with begins to complain. And they begin to argue with your boss. And they say things like, "This is too hard. We can't do these things." They start saying, "Our previous employers never made us do anything like this." Or, "Why can't we just get the lifestyle increase now? This is too hard. We're not going to do it." How do you think that boss would feel in this situation? What do you think that boss might do? If it's me, get out of this conference room, deal's off, it's not coming back. And this is kind of a crazy scenario that we're imagining here. And it might seem like this is something that doesn't happen in real life. But I want to go through a text this morning, a passage of scripture where a very similar scenario takes place. So if you'll open up your Bibles and turn to Numbers chapter 13. Numbers chapter 13. In the Old Testament, one of the first books on the left side of your Bible there, Numbers chapter 13. And we're going to look at a scenario that's very similar to what we've talked about so far this morning. And we're going to see the word congregation show up multiple times here in Numbers 13 and 14. And I know that Brother Dempsey just preached a lesson about how we can grow by working together and gave a really positive example in the book of Nehemiah. And in the education world, I know there's several teachers here. In the education world, it's always good practice to give positive examples as well as negative examples. And this morning, we're going to be looking at a more negative example of a congregation, a group of people where things didn't work out for them. And then we're going to see how that relates to congregations today. So here in Numbers 13 and 14, we're going to talk about when God won't use a congregation. And so I'm really excited to read this and study this with you this morning. So you're in Numbers chapter 13, just a little bit of context for where we are in Numbers 13. I'm sure we all know about Moses led the children of Israel out of Egyptian slavery, led them across the Red Sea on dry ground, and God has been guiding them toward the promised land. And all along the way, these people have been complaining a lot. They were complaining about not having food, and then God gives them food, and they complain about the type of food that God had given them. They're complaining about not having water, and then God gives them water. They're complaining about how the journey is too hard, just all of these things all along the way. It's been a really long journey for these people, but it's also been a really long journey for God because he's had to put up with this constant complaining and murmuring. And now, as we get to Numbers chapter 13, they are on the edge of the promised land. They've done all of this traveling, gone through so much hardship, and they are right on the edge of the promised land. And that's where we're going to pick up right here in verse 1. Numbers 13, start with me, verse 1. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Send out for yourself men so that they may spy out the land of Canaan, which I am going to give to the sons of Israel. You shall send a man from each of their fathers' tribes, every one a leader among them." So Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran at the command of the Lord, all of them, men who were heads of the sons of Israel. And so right here, just in these first three verses, we see that God says, go ahead and send some spies into the promised land. They're right there on the edge. send 12 spies, one man who's going to be a leader from the tribes, one man from every tribe. So that's going to be really important as we read through this. These men were leaders of their tribes. That's why they were chosen to be spies. He says, send them into the land, and that's what Moses is going to do. And so maybe I'm going to make too much of this, but do you think that God needed some reconnaissance of the land of Canaan, that God needed that in order to conquer the land? I don't believe that for a second. Maybe I'm going to make too much out of this, but verse 2, where God tells Moses, send out for yourself men, it seems like this could be a situation where God is giving them an opportunity to take a look at how great this land is, to take a look at the people and what it looks like and the opportunity that awaits them. And it's not really for God, but we're going to see that this is going to be a really trying situation for them as we read. So here in verses 4 through 16, we see the names of the 12 spies. I'm not going to read that because I'll probably butcher the names anyway, but we get the specific names of who these 12 men are. So let's pick up in verse 17. When Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, he said to them, go up there into the Negev, then go up into the hill country, see what the land is like, and whether the people who live in it are strong or weak, whether they are few or many. How is the land in which they live? Is it good or bad? And how are the cities in which they live? Are they like open camps or with fortifications? How is the land? Is it fat or lean? Are there trees in it or not? Make an effort then to get some of the fruit of the land. Now, the time was the time of the first ripe grapes. And so Moses tells these 12 men specifically what to look for. He says, go into the land, see if it's a good land. Is it good for pastures, for fruit, for crops? And they say, take a look at the people. Are there a bunch of them or are there just a few of them? Are they strong or are they weak? On top of that, he says, look at the cities. Are these open camps? Are these relatively new cities where, there's nothing really permanent there? Or are these fortifications? Take a look and see what that's like. And then he encourages them, hey, it's the time of the first ripe grapes. So why don't you bring some fruit back from the land so we can see what this land is going to be like? And so let's keep reading here in verse 21. So they went up and they spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin as far as Rehob at Labo Hamath. When they had gone up into the Negev, they came to Hebron, where Ahiman, Shishai, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak, were. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. Then they came to the valley of Eshcol, and from there they cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes, and they carried it on a pole between two men with some of the pomegranates and the figs. That place was called the valley of Eshcol because of the cluster which the sons of Israel cut down from there. When they returned from spying out the land at the end of 40 days, they proceeded to come to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the sons of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. And they brought back word to them, to all the congregation, and showed them the fruit of the land. So before we see what they said about this land, these 12 men go into the land. It says they were in there for 40 days. I had a little chart and I debated if I wanted to show you or not, but these men, it took them 40 days for a reason. They traveled all the way up to the top of the land of Canaan from just outside it. So it took them 40 days to really get a good idea of all the stuff that is there. They say that they see the descendants of Anak there, and that's going to be really important later because there's going to be a specific feature about them that's going to have a big effect. They see this city that is well established. In verse 22, it kind of seems like an afterthought, but it says, now Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. And if you remember, there were Egyptians among the Israelites. And one of the things they prided themselves on is, look at our buildings. These are well-established cities. We have built so much. Look how great this is. But the writer here says Hebron was built 7 years before that city in Egypt. So that's telling us these are well-established cities that they saw. And that's also going to be really important as we keep reading. And so they find this massive cluster of grapes. Takes 2 men on a pole to carry it back. I can't imagine grapes that big. That's why the grapes, by the way. There's also, they get some pomegranates and figs. They come back to Moses and Aaron, and they're going to tell the report of the land. Let's see what that report is. Read with me here in verse 27. Thus they told him and said, we went into the land where you sent us, and it certainly does flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who live in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. Amalek is living in the land of the Negev, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites are living in the hill country, and the Canaanites are living by the sea and by the side of the Jordan. Verse 30, then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "We should by all means go up and take possession of it, for we will surely overcome it." But the men who had gone up with him said, "We are not able to go up against the people, for they are too strong for us." So they gave out to the sons of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone in spying it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great size. There also we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak are part of the Nephilim, and we became like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight." So after 40 days, and I'm sure they were, just on edge, waiting to hear what this report was going to be, these men come back to Moses and they say, "This land is great, but there's some big guys there. They are huge." And down in verse 33, it says they look like grasshoppers in their own sight and in their sight. There's some huge people here. Not only that, but the cities are strong and they're fortified cities. On top of that, it's not like there's just one nation in the land. If you saw there in verse 29, there's multiple different nations that are in this land. So it's not just going to be a come in, one battle, and we're done. This is going to be multiple battles at multiple times. This is going to be a fierce, really challenging situation that they're going to go into. And in verse 29, we see that Amalek is specifically mentioned, and our Old Testament history brain should be lighting up when we see Amalek right here. Because if you remember, after Israel had crossed the Red Sea, after coming out of Egypt, Amalek attacked them. And Israel, through the power of God, was able to overcome them. But here's somebody that has a history of violence toward the Israelites. And these spies say, these guys are over there. They're huge. The cities are huge. There's a bunch of nations. One of them already doesn't like us. This is going to be terrible. We can't do this. But verse 30, we see Caleb singing a completely different tune. He says, "We should by all means go up and take possession of it, for we will surely overcome it." But that wasn't a very popular message at all, because we see those men say, we can't. There is no way. They are too strong for us. There's no way that we can go in and conquer these people. And so we're going to see as we keep reading that this report gets spread to all of the sons of Israel, all of the Israelites, and it's going to have a massive effect on them. Let's see what that effect was here in chapter 14, starting verse 1. "Then all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. And the whole congregation said to them, 'Would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become plunder. And would it not be better for us to return to Egypt?' And so they said to one another, 'Let us appoint a leader and return to Egypt.'" So we see this bad report that these spies bring back is just devastating to these people. They cry, they weep that night, and they immediately start grumbling and complaining about Moses and about Aaron. And they say, "Oh, we should just die in this wilderness. That would be better. We should just go back to Egypt. Why is God even bringing us to this land if we're just going to be wiped out? This is horrible." And they even go so far as saying, "Let's appoint a leader right now. Let's go back to Egypt." It's just terrible, this report, what this does. So they hear this bad report. Immediately, they begin to grumble about their leadership. They immediately were ready to fire Moses and Aaron, appoint a new leader, go back to Egypt. And they were complaining about wanting to go back to this place where they were accustomed to and that they were just a little bit more comfortable with. Well, naturally, this is going to have a big reaction to the people who stand for the Lord. And let's see what that reaction is. Start with me in verse 5. Verse 5. "Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces in the presence of all the assembly of the congregation of the sons of Israel. Joshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, of those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes. And they spoke to all the congregation of the sons of Israel, saying, 'The land which we have passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord is pleased with us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they will be our prey. Their protection has been removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them.'" Verse 10. "But all the congregation said to stone them with stones. Then the glory of the Lord appeared in the tent of meeting to all the sons of Israel." So upon hearing this bad report, the people of Israel are complaining against God, against Moses and Aaron, and they want to go back to Egypt. And we see the humility and sort of the reverence for God in verse 5. Moses and Aaron, they understand how big of a deal what these people are saying. They get it. This is bad. So they fall on their faces in the presence of all the people. We see now Joshua, the son of Nun, one of the 12 spies, and Caleb, they tear their clothes and they say, we can absolutely go into this land. And if God is pleased with us, he's already said he's going to give it to us and we will overcome it. They say that God had removed the protection from all those people already. God did that and said that they would become their prey if only they don't rebel against the Lord and don't do what basically they're going to do. And we see in verse 10, I mean, these are some amazing verses, what Joshua and Caleb say, right? Really encouraging, standing up for the Lord. But verse 10, these people would have none of it. They were picking up stones and ready to kill these men who just stood up for the Lord. And then we see at the end of verse 10, the glory of the Lord appears to all of Israel in the tabernacle, in the tent of meeting. And so this is sort of a really micro scale of what just happened, but this reminds me of when my brother and I would be fighting and wrestling, and I'm getting pounded up there, but we're making too much noise. And here comes Dad in the doorway. Oh man, this is serious. So if you magnify that by 200 billion, that's what's happening right now. The glory of the Lord appears. Everybody sees it. This is serious. And now it's God's turn to give his reaction to what these people are doing. Let's read God's reaction here in verse 11. The Lord said to Moses, how long will this people spurn me? And how long will they not believe in me, despite all the signs which I have performed in their midst? I will smite them with pestilence and dispossess them, and I will make you into a nation greater and mightier than they. But Moses said to the Lord, then the Egyptians will hear of it, for by your strength you brought up this people from their midst, and they will tell it to the inhabitants of this land. They have heard that you, O Lord, are in the midst of this people. For you, O Lord, are seen eye to eye, while your cloud stands over them, and you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and in a pillar of fire by night. Now, if you slay this people as one man, then the nations who have heard of your fame will say, because the Lord could not bring this people into the land which he promised them by oath, therefore he slaughtered them in the wilderness. But now I pray, let the power of the Lord be great, just as you have declared. The Lord is slow to anger and abundant in loving kindness, forgiving iniquity and transgression. But he will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and the fourth generations. Verse 19. Pardon, I pray, the iniquity of this people, according to the greatness of your loving kindness, just as you have also forgiven this people from Egypt, even until now. So God hears these complaints. He sees that they're about to kill the people who are sticking up for him. His glory appears in the tabernacle to everybody. And God says, I am done. I'm done with these people. I'm going to smite them and I'm going to start over with you, Moses. I'm going to make you and your descendants a nation greater and more powerful than these Israelites ever were. And I got to be honest, if I'm Moses, that sounds pretty good. And I mean, God has had to deal with the complaints of all of these people in Israel, but Moses has had to deal with it too. He's had to deal with the constant disrespect, even though God placed him as the leader over these people. So if I'm Moses, really, this sounds great. But Moses, being the man that he was, he only thought about the reputation of God and what that would do to God's reputation. Moses says, what will the Egyptians think? What are they going to say to these nations? Those nations are just going to say, it's because you couldn't take us out. That's why you had to wipe them out right on the edge of the promised land. So don't do that, please. And he prays that God would forgive these people for their sins. And then we get God's response next to Moses's prayer on behalf of the people. And so let's read what God says in verse 20. So the Lord said, I have pardoned them according to your word. But indeed, as I live, all the earth will be filled with the glory of the Lord. Surely all the men who have seen my glory and my signs, which I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, yet have put me to the test these 10 times and have not listened to my voice, shall by no means see the land which I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those who spurned me see it. But my servant Caleb, because he has had a different spirit and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land which he entered, and his descendants shall take possession of it. Now the Amalekites and the Canaanites live in the valleys. Turn tomorrow and set out to the wilderness by the way of the Red Sea. Verse 26. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, how long shall I bear with this evil congregation who are grumbling against me? I have heard the complaints of the sons of Israel, which they are making against me. Say to them, as I live, says the Lord, just as you have spoken in my hearing, so I will surely do to you. Your corpses will fall in this wilderness, even all your numbered men, according to the complete number from 20 years old and upward, who have grumbled against me. Surely you shall not come into the land in which I swore to settle you, except Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun. Your children, however, whom you said would become a prey, I will bring them in, and they will know the land which you have rejected. But as for you, your corpses will fall in this wilderness. Your sons shall be shepherds for 40 years in the wilderness, and they will suffer for your unfaithfulness until your corpses lie in the wilderness. According to the number of days which you spied out the land, 40 days, for every day you shall bear your guilt a year, even 40 years, and you will know my opposition. I, the Lord, have spoken. Surely this I will do to all this evil congregation who are gathered together against me. In this wilderness they shall be destroyed, and there they shall be. So right after Moses prays that God would forgive the iniquity of the people, God says, I've pardoned them. I've forgiven them of this, and he doesn't wipe them out right there on the spot, although he had every right to do so. He had every right to wipe them out. But instead, he makes it very clear these people will not get to enter into this promised land. And remember, they're right on the edge of it. They're right there. And God says these people will not enter the land that I've promised. But instead, they are going to wander in the wilderness for 40 years, 1 year for every day the spies were in the land. 40 days, 40 years. And if you remember what one of the complaints of the people was, well, if we go into this land, our children are going to be slain and they're going to die. And God says in verse 31, your children, whom you said were going to be prey, they're going to be the ones who get this land. But even them, they have to suffer for 40 years and be shepherds in the wilderness because of the unfaithfulness of their parents. And God makes it very clear. He says, I, the Lord, have spoken. And this will happen. And then there's another consequence that God gives in verse 36. As for the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land and who returned and made all the congregation grumble against him by bringing out a bad report concerning the land, even those men who brought out the very bad report of the land died by a plague before the Lord. But Joshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, remained alive out of those men who went to spy out the land. When Moses spoke these words to all the sons of Israel, the people mourned greatly. And so God says, all of these people from age 20 and up who grumbled against me, they saw all my signs, all the things that I've done for them leading up to this point, they don't get to enter the land. And 10 of those 12 spies, those 10 who brought back the very bad report, they were killed by a plague before the Lord, just like that. But not Caleb and not Joshua, because they were different. They were different. And so we see in verse 39, Moses tells all these people the words that God had told them, and they mourned greatly. And I wish this was the end of the story. Like, can we please just stop there? That they understand now, they mourn greatly. That's it. That's not it. Let's keep reading and see what the end of this matter is. Verse 40. In the morning, however, they rose up early and went up to the ridge of the hill country, saying, here we are. We have indeed sinned, but we will go up to the place which the Lord has promised. But Moses said, why then are you transgressing the commandment of the Lord when it will not succeed? Do not go up, or you will be struck down before your enemies, for the Lord is not among you. For the Amalekites and the Canaanites will be there in front of you, and you will fall by the sword, inasmuch as you have turned back from following the Lord, and the Lord will not be with you. Verse 44, but they went up heedlessly to the ridge of the hill country. Neither the ark of the covenant of the Lord nor Moses left the camp. Verse 45, the Amalekites and the Canaanites who lived in that hill country came down, and they struck them and beat them down as far as Hormah. And so we see, I wish that was the end of the matter, but we see in the morning, these people say, you know what? We have sinned, but we're going to go into the land. I mean, we're right here. We're going to do it. And Moses says, why are you transgressing the commandment of the Lord? He said, you're not going to go in there. God's not going to be with you in this. Don't do it. And I love verse 44. Well, I don't love it, but verse 44, it says they heedlessly went up. And we get this very physical representation that God's not with them because the Ark of the Covenant didn't go with them. And Moses didn't go with them. And naturally, what happened? They got struck down and beat down as far as Hormah. So this is a congregation that God won't use. It was this people of Israel. We see in this text where God told them he was already giving them the land, but they didn't take it. He would do all the heavy lifting, but they didn't believe him. And so what I want to do this morning is notice some things, some characteristics about this congregation, this group of people that made them a people that God would not use. And it applies to some congregations today and can happen anywhere. Number one is that they were focusing on the obstacles. 10 of those 12 spies came back and they said, these cities are huge, they're fortified, these people are huge, they're massive, they're strong, there's a bunch of people, this land devours its inhabitants, there's no way. We can't go up, there's not a chance. They were focusing on the obstacles instead of the God that had brought them so far already. And then when that report is given to all the people of Israel probably focused on the obstacles even more than the spies did, because they were grumbling about their leadership. They wanted to either die right there, or they wanted to go back to Egypt. And they were focusing on the obstacles ahead of them instead of the God who had already done so much for them. They did not believe in him. And this can happen in congregations today. Can I just say that negativity is contagious? It's very contagious, and it spreads like wildfire in this passage here, and it can spread like wildfire in congregations today. It could be that we look at the world around us and we see the hot topic issues that are so prevalent in our society, and we start saying things like, there's just no way that I could be a Christian today. There's just no way that we can do God's work today. There's no way that God's work is going to be done with all these people out here doing all this stuff. And that is focusing on the obstacles instead of focusing on the God that has brought us so far. And then in local churches, this can be an obstacle that I've seen, maybe you've seen, heard, witnessed, where maybe there's one person or a group of people where negativity is just contagious. It doesn't matter what the idea, what the issue is, or whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. There will be some way to complain about it. That'll never work. That won't happen here. Or maybe, we tried that a couple years ago, but that won't work here. Or maybe even worse, nobody is going to be converted today. Nobody wants to follow God. Can I just say that's focusing on the obstacles and not on the God that has brought us so far? And it's contagious, and it can spread to anybody. Negativity is contagious. We need to be really careful about how we react and interact with each other, because it can affect everybody. So one characteristic of a congregation that God won't use is when that congregation is focusing on the obstacles. Another one that we see in this text is that they were looking backward. Here are these people, and they are on the edge of the promised land. They're right there about to go into it. But when they see a couple of challenges, they want to go back to Egypt. They would rather go back to a bad situation that they know, and they know what to expect, and in a way is comfortable for them, even if it's not a good situation, they know what to expect, rather than go into the unknown and what's uncomfortable, even though it was promised that it would be better for them. And does that ever happen in local churches today? In local congregations, it can be so easy to focus on things that happened in the past, no matter what it is. It could be grudges, it could be splits that happen, it could be really great times in the past or sad times. Whatever it is, what I've experienced in my short life and being at different congregations is that sometimes the same people who only focus on the obstacles and sometimes complain the most about an issue are also sometimes the same people that refuse to tag along with the proposed solution to that problem. Sometimes we would rather stay in a situation that we don't really like because we know it and it's comfortable, rather than going into an unknown and uncomfortable situation. And so we need to push forward and not be people who are looking backward. Another characteristic of these people that we see here in Numbers 13 and 14 is that they were lacking leadership. And I'm not really talking about Moses and Aaron here, because that's the God-ordered leadership that God put in place. But what I am talking about is these 12 spies. You remember that those spies were chosen to be spies because they were leaders of their tribes. And so these should have been the people who had massive influence on their tribes to trust in God and go into the land. But that's not what happened. And then on top of that, whenever the people want to go back to Egypt, maybe I'm going to make too much out of this, but stay with me here. When they want to go back to Egypt, did you notice how they didn't say, I'll lead us, let's go? These were people who were saying, let's appoint a leader, and let's go back to Egypt. But they didn't have the leadership qualities or characteristics or be willing to be that leader themselves. And this can happen in congregations as well. There is a severe lack of elders in congregations all across the country. Praise be to God, there are faithful elders here. That's an amazing thing to have. And I'm not really talking about them. Kind of like Moses and Aaron, let's push them off to the side for a second. But if you think about tribes, that's pretty much families, right? Big groups of families. I mean, we have the Byers tribe here today, don't we? And we can see the positive influence that strong leadership in families can have for generations. It's amazing. It's a wonderful thing. But on the other hand, we know what can happen when men don't lead their families in the way of the Lord. We see what happens for generations when people don't do this, and families affect the local church because families are the church. And so we can see how that can have a detrimental effect on families. And so another characteristic of a congregation that God won't use is when they're lacking leadership. And so another one, the last one we're going to talk about is probably the biggest one in this passage, is that they were underestimating God. For the Israelites, God was smaller than those tall people and their big cities in the Canaan land. God was smaller than them. Those people were wrong, but they were underestimating God. If you notice in chapter 14 and verse 11, when God speaks, whenever he's giving his response to all of this that was happening, in verse 11, he says, "How long will this people spurn me? And how long will they not believe in me, despite all the signs which I have performed in their midst?" So think about what these people had already seen. They'd seen the 10 plagues in Egypt. They had seen God split the Red Sea and they walked on dry land. They had seen where God helped them to defeat Amalek in that battle. They saw God provide bread on the ground, amazing manna. He provided the quail. He provided water where there was none. He gave them the law. They saw the mountain where they were too scared to approach God. And if they touched the mountain, they would die. They saw all of these things. But when they saw these big people and these big cities, God became small. And they underestimated him. And even when Joshua and Caleb, who rightly estimated God, they say, "No, we can absolutely do this. God's on our side." The people wanted to stone them with stones. The truth of God was not popular at all. They did not believe God. So for us today, this can be an issue as well. Underestimating God. Is all of this just a thought exercise for us? Or do we really believe that God is real? And that God is able to conquer and overwhelmingly conquer any challenge, obstacle, or difficult life circumstance that any of us can face? Do we come here just because, well, that's what I grew up to do, or maybe, well, that's just what you do on Sunday, or for whatever reason that may not line up with this? Do we believe that God is real and that he can do amazing things in our lives, in this community, with people that we haven't even met yet? Because if we underestimate God, we will come to the same end as these people. And similarly, not only do we believe in God, do we believe what God says? Because we know that God has revealed to us everything pertaining to life and godliness, and we love to talk about that stuff. But the other side is God himself has also revealed to us the very real punishment, the very real bad place for people who do not choose him. And does anybody here want to test him as the Israelites did? God said, "You will not go into the land. You surely will not go into the land." And they said, "No, but we will. I've sinned, but we will go into the land." And it didn't work out for them. And if we are the same in that way, in that we test God in what he has told us, we will meet the same end as those Israelites. We will be struck down. We will. So God won't use these characteristics of a congregation. And if you notice something about these, it's because the people get in the way of God's work. Do you see that? If only we would let God fight our battles for us and let him do the heavy lifting and kind of just get out of the way. And I'm confident that nobody in this room wants to be like this. And the application of this is really simple. We want to do the opposite of these things, just like Joshua and Caleb did here. God will use a congregation that focuses on him. God will use a congregation that looks forward to all the good things that God has promised. God will use a congregation that displays leadership, not just among elders, but in families. And God will use a congregation that magnifies him at every opportunity that they can instead of underestimating him. As a congregation, if we do this stuff, God will use us, and he will do amazing things on us, in us, and through us as we talk to people, as we do anything. It's amazing. I love it. And if only we could just get out of the way and let God work. Let's let God work. The biggest obstacle that each of us has to overcome individually, not as a congregation, but individually in our own lives, is sin. And if we try to kind of be like the Israelites and go up into the land and fight the battle ourselves, or try to get ourselves clean, we're going to be scrubbing away forever. And we're going to find that after forever has gone by, nothing's changed. It is only through the blood of Jesus that we can become clean. Just like the scenario that we started with, our boss has offered us a significant lifestyle increase. He has offered that to us. He promises to help us along the way. He promises to use his power and influence to make sure that it goes well for us. God promises that. If only we would let God work. Grace is the free gift of God to salvation to all those who believe. And so if you're here this morning and you've studied and you've come to believe that Jesus is the Son of God, and you want to be baptized into his death, burial, and resurrection, become a part of his family, we'd love to do that today. That'd be great. If you are a Christian and you failed, or maybe you've been demonstrating some of these characteristics that we talked about congregations that God won't use. It's not that he can't use it, but he won't, because the people get in the way. We would love to pray for you, or whatever you might need right now. Whatever your need is, there's an opportunity right now to make it right while together we stand and while we sing.